This is the debriefing video for the January 9th, 2023 meeting for the Board of Trustees. Decently normal opening with the call to order, invocation and pledge, and roll call. The approval of the agenda. It was proposed, NOLA proposed removing the two board review motions that I had on here for a member and an alternate. That went through 6-1. It depends on how it falls out. It could put us in an awkward position because we have the big meeting coming up in March for board review. I'll bring those appointments to the February meeting. So she had stated in the meeting that she wanted to look it over a little more, I think with the idea of bringing other candidates forward. So we'll see how that goes. I've tried for months to get people to apply for those types of things, and it's interesting, that's for sure. So next, approval of past meeting minutes, treasurer's report, paying bills, fire department report, all normal. The annual fire department report, Alan spoke on the last year, some of the numbers and some of the changes and things moving forward. The planning commission report and the zoning board appeals report, fairly normal, just summaries of what happened in those meetings in this last month. The maintenance and grounds report, I went over and read that. And then we had the annual planning and zoning report by Steve going over the numbers for the last year on what has occurred, which quite a lot through all of that. Next, we had our first public comment, and Michelle made a comment that she heard public water was coming to Dalton and she doesn't want it. Next, we had the Spark grant, and we had a presentation by Matt from Fleece and Vandenbrink on this and questions by the board. This was for the $15,000 to get a plan together and to apply for the Spark grant, and that ended up passing 5-2. So that went through. Next, we had Resolution 2023-01 for water rates, and Matt and Wade from the Water Policy Board in the county came to talk about that and be in on the meeting. The water rates themselves ended up passing 7-0. Next, Ordinance 2023-02 for water corrections in the ordinances themselves, that ended up passing 7-0 as well. Next, we have Ordinance 2023-03 for water connections. And this is the mandatory water connections, and that's the big debate that's been occurring for months, a long time now, and will continue somewhat. What ended up happening here is Carrie made a motion to pass it but adjust it, eliminating items B2, B3, and C. And so various talk occurred. That ended up failing, and that ended up failing in a That ended up failing in a 3-3-1 split, which is very odd. And so I watched the video again today to try to have some of my stuff. A lot of things happen in there, and I have some decent notes on here myself. And so I believe that's the way that went. It was 3-4-3 against. Nope. It must have been. That was wrong. I wrote that down wrong. So it must have been 2-4. 4 against and 1 abstention. Really, there shouldn't be abstentions on these types of votes because the trustees and all of the elected officials, the entire board, right, has a duty to vote on things. Not voting on it is nonfeasance, but there's really no corrective mechanism for it. You should only abstain when you have some sort of conflict of interest, but nevertheless, happens. So that one ended up failing, right, in an odd set of numbers. Next, there was a motion by Lee to pass it as is with the understanding that it would go back to the Water Policy Board to try to get them to change it more in the direction that we would like. Essentially take the small win now, avoid too much of a conflict, and then try to get a large win by getting the Water Policy Board and the other municipalities to adjust that ordinance a little more than it's already been adjusted, which is what's being passed. Or we'll talk about, of the meeting tomorrow, we'll talk about having the ordinances diverge between the municipalities. So, and that's where we're getting into interesting things. So that ended up passing with 4 yes, 0 against, and 3 abstentions. So very odd. Next, we have the quarterly budget adjustments. And so this was broken out into 2 pieces because all of the quarterly budget adjustments weren't controversial except for the adjustment for the maintenance supervisor position, or head of maintenance as I normally call it. And so what I ended up doing is I made the motion to do all of the quarterly budget adjustments except for that one. And that passed 7-0. And then a motion was made to change the maintenance supervisor from an hourly wage to a salary at almost the current numbers, right? So technically a tiny amount less. But to switch it from hourly to salary essentially at the current wage. And so that also passed 7-0 with the idea of coming back around in some sort of more complex and structured way to versions of employee wages. Next were those board review, member and alternate. Those were taken off the agenda, so we didn't address those. Next, we had the land sale proposal for the piece on Russell Road. And this ended up going through as setting a minimum for $11,000. And that was 6-4-0 against 1 abstention, just because someone had stepped out of the room. Next, so that was $11,000 minimum bid for the property on Russell Road that's up right now. Next, we have the land bid opening on East Daniels. This was set at a $10,000 minimum bid. There was 1 bid put in, and it was for exactly $10,000. And accepting that passed for 7-0, so unanimously. Next, we have Ordinance 2023-01, which is the ORV ordinance, and this was to remove the registrations, which would be nice going into next year, logistically and in-house. And that passed 7-0. Next was Andrea's leave, and this is up for 42 days once she has leave for the surgery. So hopefully it's shorter than that, but that passed 7-0. Next was sending the camping ordinance to the Planning Commission to start the review process, passed 7-0. Next was same thing, but with the enforcement ordinance, 7-0. Next was Resolution 2023-02, and this is the first resolution for the Central Road paving project. And I'm planning on having that hearing, the first hearing, next month, and then the final hearing the next month. On that passed 7-0. No one spoke on it. No one spoke on it in the first comment, the second comment, or at the time. I don't think anyone was at the meeting for that. Next, we have the real estate escalation clause policy, and this was to say that the township isn't going to doesn't want to accept escalation clauses in the closed real estate bids, but if an escalation clause is put in, the highest number that is in there will be treated as the bid itself. That passed 7-0. Next, we have payroll procedure policy, and there was an inherent contradiction in the handbook that says things are going to be paid bi-weekly every other week is what they must mean by that, and then that's going to be on the 15th and 30th of each month, which that by definition is bi-monthly. And so we eliminated that part, which is the way the township has been currently doing it. I don't know for how long, and then that moves it to the bi-weekly setup. That passed 7-0. Next, we had 2 discussion items. One is the enforcement ordinance for the Code of Ordinances, and I just had 1 small adjustment in there. Otherwise, I'll work on getting that ready to bring it forward for next month for the board. And then we had the annual meeting date. There was some discussion here of dates that trustees couldn't make, but we will discuss it in February for sure. Also, the annual meeting and then the budget meeting to follow will be on March 18th at 2 p.m. So that's a Saturday, so more people can make it. It's March 18th at 2 p.m. That's what it's set at now. Now, officially, that's why I need the date and the time, is because the board has to pass a resolution. So I will write that resolution up and bring it to the board to be voted in February. Now, technically, the board could change that. Someone could change that at the time. Very hard to predict boards and votes and people. So, as of now, March 18th at 2 p.m. with discussion happening in the regular meeting in February. And then I'll also bring it into that meeting to set up a separate work session. If we had it late enough in March, we could talk about it both in the February meeting and the March meeting. But because moving it earlier in March means we're going to eliminate that, then I'll propose at least having at least 1 completely separate work session just about the budget also. And we'll talk about that in the February meeting, where we'll also talk about the budget. Next, we had our final public comment. Andrea had gotten up and talked about the township being at will employment. And then we adjourned. And that is the meeting. So it was decently interesting. A number of interesting things happened in there. And some of them, quite a few of them, there'll be some fallout for quite a while. So if anyone has anything, questions, thoughts, ideas, comments, concerns on any of that or anything else with the township, feel free to give me a call. Area code 231-332-6700. That's my direct line here at the office. Or email supervisor@daltontownship.org. Otherwise, this is Jeff signing off. Until next time.